field day for the heat down there. 1,000 people in the street singing songs and they carrying signs, mostly saying hooray for our side. There's battle lines being drawn. Nobody's right if everybody wrong. Young people speak in their mind, getting so much resistance from behind. We got to stop the children, what's that sound? Everybody looks, it's going down.
Hello, everyone. This is Lauren Steiner, and welcome to tonight's edition of The Robust Opposition. I've been on hiatus for a couple of months while pursuing some personal things, such as moving out of LA into North Carolina. So I haven't done my show for a while, but boy, what a time to resume doing my show. Just yesterday, we finally had the media declare Joe Biden the winner of the presidential election. And here to discuss this with me are three super smart people: Branko Marcetic, who is a staff writer for Jacobin and the author of Yesterday's Man, The Case Against Joe Biden. And then I have Ross Barkan, who is a columnist for Jacobin and the Guardian, and also writes for the Nation. And I have Jennifer Epps-Addison, who is the president and co-director of the Center for Popular Democracy, a progressive advocacy organization. The liberal media predicted that Biden was going to win in a rout, and it didn't quite look that way. Yes, he has more votes in, the popular vote than Trump did, and supposedly won by a bigger margin than Trump won last time. But it was awfully close, and it took awfully long to get these votes counted and the race decided. Why do you guys think it was so close? Let's start with you, Branko.
I think there are a number of reasons. I think in terms of messaging, we can see from polling that the main reason Trump voters were drawn to Trump was because of his economic message. And the Biden campaign, the Democrats more generally, didn't really do anything to really counter that. They focused on handling the coronavirus pandemic better. And not really, talking about the economic side of things, when they really should have integrated those two things. Trump actually got out ahead of Biden in terms of the eviction ban that he signed in September, which Biden, when he put out his emergency housing package in August, didn't mention that. So, there were certain mistakes like that. I think beyond that was the different campaigns that they ran. Trump, knowing that he was underwater in polling, spent the entire year launching this very, very concerted and widespread ground operation of door knocking to get basically every last voter that either leaned to Trump or did like Trump but maybe wasn't going to vote, to get them out on election day, and maybe even swing some voters away from the Democrats towards Trump. The Biden campaign, mystifyingly, and this should go down in history as one of the great unforced errors of electioneering, same as Clinton not going to Wisconsin. They did not have a door knocking campaign for months until October. They actually said to Democrats, don't door knock, don't canvass in person, just do it all digitally. And the Texas state chair of the Democratic Party has said that was the big reason why they were unable to reach Latinos in the state, and probably why Trump ended up doing so well in that state. And that's not just in that state, but all around. So I think if I had to boil down to two things, I would say those are two really big reasons why Biden ended up massively underperforming what people thought.
How about you, Ross? Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I thought that was an excellent point about the lack of in-person canvassing. That's actually going to be the topic of the next column I do in Jacobin. I wrote a column earlier in the year about this danger of not doing canvassing. I think the election, it came down to the remarkable Republican turnout, which is not something I foresaw and a lot of people foresaw, which was, yes, we knew there would be a surge in Democratic turnout because it was going to be a an extremely polarizing election, and we understood how heated Trump was and what a motivating factor that was for Democrats. In every sense, this was building toward a wave like 2008. What happened was the Democratic wave crested quite high. Joe Biden got more votes than any Democrat in history, any president in history. Turnout was the highest ever since women had the right to vote. But the Republican turnout was amazing in many ways and almost matched the Democratic turnout. It came very close. And while Democrats claimed the presidency and flipped states that had been Trump states, the real losses were down the ballot. And I'm sure we'll talk a bit about that, but the loss in state house races, congressional races. So while it was important for Democrats to claim the presidency, and they did, not winning the Senate, not winning control of many state houses means Republicans still have a lot of power going into the next redistricting. And I do believe the strong Trump turnout, the excitement Republicans felt for Trump was a factor. Also, the strategic mistake to not do in-person canvassing, while didn't cost Biden too much. We know in presidential races, there's only so much canvassing can really do. But for all these other races down the ballot, people don't know who the candidates are. And when they meet people, they may be more likely to turn out. Republicans did a very aggressive door knocking operation. Democrats did not. And the proof is in the numbers. And that, as we recede from this race, that should be one of the stories that people talk about.
Let me ask Jennifer to weigh in. Do you have any additional reasons why you think this election was so close?
Let me say, first of all, that what I would say is that this election was closer than it should have been. Because I do think it is important to understand that in the middle of a pandemic with rampant voter suppression, with a sitting president that has no morals, right, and is willing to use every tool, dirty trick in the book to suppress Black and Brown and Indigenous votes and the votes of poor people and so many people in this country, right, that the fact that we had record turnout, the fact that, that Joe Biden did win the most presidential votes in our country's history is important. But I think it's important, as Ross said, to understand that victory largely doesn't belong to the sort of strategy nor the operations of the Biden campaign. And if it were left to his main strategy, which was a moderate, let's convert what people like to call Obama to Trump voters, right? And that strategy largely was not a winning strategy, right? I think on election night in Wisconsin, when I was in Milwaukee and the votes were rolling in, one of the journalists actually said Joe Biden came to the state and he tried really hard to reach out to rural folks and suburban folks. That means white people in Wisconsin, if you don't know the geography, right? And he said that was largely a failure. They pretty much rejected him. And what brought Joe Biden this presidency were the Blackest and some of the youngest cities in this country: Milwaukee, Detroit, Philadelphia, Atlanta. And it's a strategy that our network had been screaming from the rooftops, along with other people like Black Voters Matter and She the People, and even the movement for Black Lives, which is we didn't need a single white person in this country to change their vote from 2016 to put this thing in the bag by big numbers. We had enough unregistered but eligible Black and Brown voters in all of those cities, in all of those states that were going to be critical to the election to put it in the bag. And those of us who knew that, despite the fact that we could, that there was a lack of investment from the campaign side, went hard. And it's the New Georgia Project, not Joe Biden, that's responsible for Georgia, and Stacey Abrams, of course. And it's Black leaders organizing communities in Wisconsin, and it's Detroit Action, in Michigan, and it's Make the Road Pennsylvania, and One Pennsylvania, and 215 People's Alliance and the Working Families Party in Pennsylvania, right? It's Lucha in Arizona. These are grassroots organizations that brought this thing over the finish line. And if we had stuck to the Lincoln Project strategy, right, we wouldn't have won. And then let me just say one other thing, Ross, you were talking about on the ground canvassing, and Trump was not just doing that to his base. He had a concerted effort to actually canvass and convert votes, right? Disinformation and engagement was his two strategies with Black voters and Latinx voters. And by and large, the money that he spent knocking doors in Philadelphia and Milwaukee, I drove past his field office in Milwaukee. It was usually full every time I drove past it, right? And the fact that he was able to get more Black votes and more Latinx votes, right, and more votes in every demographic in 2020 than in 2016 shows that engagement plus disinformation strategy was effective. And Biden simply was not putting the same engagement into those communities. So it really is a victory of community organizing, which is why we're sitting here today going, okay, we defeated an authoritarian.
A lot of people are saying that if it weren't for COVID, Trump would have won in a landslide. I read something that of people who said that the economy was the most important issue, 80% voted for Trump. Now, Matt Taibbi wrote a column saying that Republicans are now the party of working people. Now, whether that's true or not, that seems to be how working people perceive Trump, at least white working class voters.
That's a really important addition, Lauren, really important addition.
But everybody knows, we know that Trump did not do anything to materially improve their economic condition. So why do you guys think that white working class people still support him? And I also want to mention, Jennifer, that he increased his support among Black men 18% over 2016 and Black women 4% over 2016.
Yes, absolutely. Because he had a very well-funded program that was based on engagement and disinformation.
Can't people look at their own checkbooks or whatever and understand what their own economic situation is? This is what I don't understand.
I think your descriptor is really important, white working class people. And, Bree Newsom said it best. This country, people keep saying this was a really divided electorate. And the truth of the matter is that white people in this country are divided. By and large, people of color, especially Black folks, especially, Latinx folks who 2/3 have voted for Joe Biden, right? By and large are pretty united in terms of our vision for this country and the candidate we felt would get us there. It's white folks that really, are split on the question. And, the truth is George Gale from People's Action talks about the fact that there are different types of white folks, right? We treat every community as a monolith and that there are different types of white folks. And so we have a set of elite people, right? People who are comfortable, people who haven't stopped getting a paycheck during COVID, people who got to shelter in place and hire nannies, right? To help with their kids who are in school online, people who could afford the medical bills when they got sick or someone they knew got sick from COVID. And then there are folks who, despite who they vote for, despite what their political leanings are, the truth is that they're in pain. They're suffering. And they are looking for relief, and they are looking for a party who will fight for them. And, the Democratic Party isn't doing it, right? The bill that Nancy Pelosi passed, the HEROES Act, did not have $2,000 a month every month until the pandemic is over, like other countries have done. It didn't move people into the Medicare system if they lost their employer-sponsored health care, right? So I think, at least the Republican Party is out here talking to these folks, right? Talking about it. And what we need is an anti-racist, multiracial working class party. For me, that's the Working Families Party, but really that's the demand. That's what we have to build. It's certainly not going to come at the hand, liberation for working people is not going to come at the hands of billionaires and capitalists. That right. Won't happen.
I think the Working Families Party has work to do in that front. If you look down just in New York, New York City, the voter breakdown of people who voted working families to save the ballot line, it was mostly in sort of affluent white neighborhoods. Black working class neighborhoods were not voting on the working families line for various reasons. And so I think a lot of these organizations do need to do a much better job of engaging people with less education. The Democratic Party, by and large, is gradually losing high school graduates. They've certainly lost white high school graduates, we know that. And as we saw from the Trump campaign, the 2020 campaign, Trump made inroads with Black and Latino people writ large, and certainly those with high school graduations without college degrees. This is something also of an international phenomenon where left-wing parties are increasingly becoming parties of very educated people. And on one hand, you can build a winning coalition out of it. On the other hand, it's a very dangerous thing because most people don't have college degrees. And in a lot of these states, the margins are so thin, if you even give a little ground, they could flip the other way. So I agree a lot with Jennifer's point that the Trump outreach to communities of color really needs to be studied. Certainly a mix of organizing, in-person canvassing, things we sort of associate with the left that now the Trump campaign was doing, obviously mixed with disinformation as well. I mean, just looking at a few counties, I wrote a piece too in my Substack about this. Starr County, Texas, on the border of Mexico, Hillary Clinton won 79% of the vote in 2016. Donald Trump in 2020 almost won Starr County. He got about 47%, 46%, remarkable flip. And the question is why? Why did this have heavily, about 95% Latino community, why did it flip so dramatically? Is it because perhaps we simplify sort of in media and organizing circles, perhaps the views of a kind of a very diverse, non-monolithic electorate? Is it also, as the chair of the Texas, I don't know if it's the chair of the Texas Democratic Party, I know a high up Texas Democrat, may have been the chair, said the lack of in-person canvassing really did us in. Was it now just Texas Republicans going down there pulling votes? Maybe. I think it's something that really needs to be studied because there are a lot of bright spots with the Democratic Party. In fact, by the fact that they won the national vote again, but a lot of danger lies ahead too. The continual loss of voters without college degrees, which cuts across the spectrum and obviously is mostly about whites right now, but Trump making gains elsewhere, something that I cannot be written off. I know no one here is writing off, but I imagine some elite Democrats are probably dismissing that right now, but it should not be dismissed.
Yeah, I'd like to speak about Mike Siegel's race, also in Texas, because he was a progressive that was supported by everyone, the progressive groups, the DNC, the DCCC. I heard him interviewed, I think it was maybe Jacobin radio or live stream or something, and he was saying that his donors do not allow him and his consultants do not allow him to run on a populist message. They would just completely turn off. And he also said that he felt that he would have been carried if Bernie Sanders was at the top of the ticket running on his populist program. He probably could have still won. He said, you would think that a congressional race would be enough. You know, it's a federal race to get people's attention, but really it's not as important as the presidential. And he said it wasn't even he lost because of the Trump voters. He didn't think he could get them. It was the non-voters. And we know that that was Bernie Sanders' strategy to win in California, is to run and to talk to all the voters, not just his base, to get the non-voters. And Mike talked about a typical voter in his district who lives in a double-wide trailer, who is enduring days of 100-degree plus heat with no air conditioning, who makes $10 an hour, who's lucky if they can get 20 hours a week. These are the people who didn't come out and vote because they didn't see there was anything for them. And Ralph Nader, Radio Hour today, he had a guest, Leonard Goodman, who's a civil rights attorney from Chicago. He said the exact same thing. He said the Democrats could not have run on a populist program because it would have offended their donors. So to me, this explains why Joe Biden famously said to his donors, nothing fundamentally will change. And this is why he did not run on a program that offered anything to the people to get them to turn out. I think it's the main reason why he didn't win in a landslide. And Trump, even though he didn't mean it, was at least saying that he would or that he did. So Branko, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, you have to remember it's not just the donors. I mean, of course, that is part of it. But the corporate America is also where people in Congress at the highest levels and at the lower levels go once they're done with politics. I believe from the last Congress, 2/3 of the outgoing Congress people ended up going into lobbying jobs. And that's a pretty common pattern among former lawmakers. And so there's a built-in incentive beyond just sort of campaign financing issues. There's a built-in incentive to not rock the boat and annoy and anger the corporate sector too much. And so, yeah, I think that's absolutely part of it, why they don't run on it. I think the other part of it is ideology. I mean, a lot of these people are true believers and, you know, to some extent also worry about what the party above them is kind of telling them. And the party above them, of course, is going to be telling them, don't run on anything that might upset all these interests. Just on the question of you know, why it is that Trump gets the support. I mean, I do want to caution about the idea that you know, it's purely white people that are divided, and that you know, people of color are inevitably going to always vote Democrat. I mean, I think this election has shown that is not saying that we should we should just assume is going to happen, because it wasn't just Black and Latino voters. It was Trump improved his margins with Asian voters, with Asian American voters, with LGBTQ voters, stunningly. He improved his standing and vote share with Muslim voters, which is, again, these were people that Trump wanted to ban from the country, and yet they went towards him. And I think, you know, why did that happen? Obviously, Trump and the Republicans out-organizing the Democrats is one answer. The other part of it, I think, is that Trump's populism, his economic populism, was always phony and counterfeit. And obviously, you know, he said so many times that he planned to cut social services and other vital government programs for people. However, during this crisis, Trump did sign the eviction ban. You know, when Biden and Democrats weren't really calling for something like that, when Congress was gridlocked, Trump signed an executive order to move money from FEMA to give to people. You know, he signed an executive order early on that used money to pay for people's medical bills. These are all very inadequate measures, and in some cases, Trump kind of undermined his own executive orders later. But I think for a population that is so unused to an executive doing really much of anything to protect them in times of hardship, you know, we can't underestimate how effective this might have been for people. You know, Obama refused to support a foreclosure moratorium back in 2008. He wouldn't do cram down. He was afraid of being labeled a socialist. Meanwhile, when Trump signed his eviction ban and the executive order to move FEMA money to people, there were Republicans who were angry at him because they said that he was acting like a socialist. And when the Democratic Party can't offer its own more robust alternative to that, a more robust agenda to help people, you know, I think it's not crazy for people, especially very politically disengaged people who, you know, don't follow the news necessarily, or, you know, for whom politics is just sort of one part of life. They see that and they think, well, you know, hey, I don't like everything this guy is saying. I think he's kind of a buffoon or a racist and all these other things. But, you know, at least he's done some things to sort of help me in this time. So, you know, I think we should take that seriously, not to give Trump credit, but to understand the deficiencies and what the Democrats have been doing and are doing during this whole thing.
A number of things that Trump says in terms of the challenges that Black voters have had getting the respect they deserve in the Democratic Party and getting real policy change from the Democratic Party are real, right? Like, he came to Milwaukee in his first campaign and he said, Black folks, what do you have to lose? And in many respects, like, the answer is not much, right? So I do really feel like we were running a ticket, and I'll give you an example. You know, all up and down my feed and with people I know, Black men that I know and love, right? They had stories and experiences of how their communities, their people, themselves, their cousins, people they love, were impacted by the 1994 crime bill, right? I have friends who said, my cousin went away for 20 years because of Joe Biden, and Trump signed the First Step Act and he's getting out next year, right? Like, in directly attributing that to Trump. So I think what we have to understand is this is the strategy. Nothing will fundamentally change. Is the ticket that we got, right? And so Joe Biden could have picked a vice president that would have been a shot across the bow to progressives and brought in again an additional base of voters, right? Could have picked a candidate that would really truly galvanize, right, some of these different communities. That's not the strategy that he went with, and largely where we see these gains having been made, despite the overt and intensely hostile voter suppression, is in these communities where there are year-round community organizing groups who have boots on the ground 365 days a year outside of just elections, that really have the trust of their communities. But, look, by and large, again, people of color did not vote for Donald Trump. And yes, there were gains made. There was a lot of money spent both on suppression, disinformation, and engagement in order to make that happen. But it wasn't significant, and it certainly wasn't as significant as the overvote share that Biden got that put him over the edge and made him the 46th president of the United States. It's a weird moment because we're all glad Trump is gone. But I keep saying to people, white supremacy did not start with Donald Trump. The economic exploitation our communities face did not start with Donald Trump, right? Even the racial injustice that brought us to the streets this summer to create the largest social movement we've seen in this country didn't start under Donald Trump, right? Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown, these were all under President Obama. And so I think that, we are in a very strange moment where, yes, we are happy that because Trump is a very real threat, right? And if people just go back to sleep and say, okay, I'm done now, I'm gonna, go back to brunch or whatever, then not Joe Biden's promise will come true. Nothing will fundamentally change. And so we keep asking people, we need you to be just as committed now to really fighting to build the country of our dreams as you were over the last 4 years trying to protect yourself and your family from Trump. Now is not the time to retreat. Now is the time to really be smart and strategic and to move on to the next step, which is trying to co-govern with a neoliberal presidency.
David Sirota wrote that the Lincoln Project might as well have burned $67 million because 97% of Republicans voted for Trump. Yet Democrats still think their centrist positioning of Biden worked. And all you have to do is listen to the Democratic caucus call that's been written about. People were leaking that as the call was going on with Nancy Pelosi.
I don't think they even believe it. I think that this is all a plant so that we start talking about it and that narrative gets out, because I do not believe that they believe that, because they know Philly was not that strategy, and they know Milwaukee was not that strategy. They know Detroit was not that strategy.
Stanberger, whatever her name was saying,
Stanberger.
We have to run away from socialism. We have to run away from Medicare for all. We have to forget about the Green New Deal. All of these things that progressives hold dear. Pramila Jayapal tried to push back, but it didn't seem like really anybody else was joining her on that. And I will say that last week I co-hosted a virtual fundraiser for her and Roe. And I had Lisa Ling, the moderator, Paul Song's wife, my other co-host, ask her the question, ask both of them the question. AOC had told Jake Tapper that she was asked if she would support Nancy Pelosi running for speaker again. And she said, I would if there was no one more progressive running. So I asked them if they would run, and both of them demurred. I mean, Rose said he was very happy being a gadfly and he didn't think he could win anyway. And I wrote in the chat, because I wasn't doing the moderating. If I was doing the moderating, I would have said it out loud. But I wrote in the chat, imagine if Bernie Sanders had that attitude when he ran in 2016, that he didn't think he could win, so he didn't run. We know he didn't think he could win. And Pramila said she was happy, being the head of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. So I thought to myself, oh my gosh, if these two progressive giants are not even planning on challenging her, and we get Pelosi, then nothing is going to fundamentally change in the Congress either. And I feel like if the material conditions of working class people do not change in the next 4 years.
2 years. Remember, 2022 it's like winter is coming. No, 2022 is coming. And so we don't have 4 years. We have 2 years to make some material conditions change.
But I was thinking specifically about the presidential race because everybody was calling Trump a fascist. I never subscribed to that theory because I don't think he's ideological at all. And, you know, he used to be a Democrat. He used to be pro-choice. He even mentioned single payer at one point. But I think that if we don't change the material conditions for working class people in this country, then we're going to set the stage for a more competent, a smarter, less gaffe-prone fascist like Josh Hawley or Tom Cotton.
Yeah, I have two thoughts. I definitely agree with that. The danger is that the Republicans will probably hold the Senate. We'll see what happens in Georgia, but very tall order to win 2 Democratic seats in Georgia in a runoff with turnout expected to decline. We'll see what happens. But assuming Republicans can keep the Senate, Mitch McConnell has no incentive to act on any piece of legislation that Joe Biden wants to move. So yes, if that's the case, Mitch McConnell can easily roadblock Joe Biden as Barack Obama was roadblocked in his entire second term. The material conditions of the working class cannot improve or get worse. And a candidate in 2024, like even Donald Trump again, let's not dismiss that possibility, or perhaps someone more competent, a little different, can come along and say, has your life gotten better or worse? Has the economy improved? We know we are entering whatever you want to call it, an economic depression. It is a very dangerous moment without a massive stimulus bill to help businesses, to help individual people, to help localities. The country can teeter off a cliff. So Joe Biden must act quickly, find a way to get money to people, if it's through the Federal Reserve, if it's somehow convincing McConnell to do something, in order to improve those material conditions, because at least the groundwork is being laid for a Republican backlash wave in 22, and then either a Trump return in 24 or a return of someone else. I will say, I agree with Lauren's point about the danger of a more competent Republican coming along who can move us closer to, you know, a very foreboding sort of authoritarianism. The one element Trump had, which I think was a driver of this remarkable turnout, was his personality and just this cult, this fan base built around him. I mean, he was a TV entertainer. He is very charismatic, though people who hate him can't always acknowledge this. He's a magnetic TV presence. His rallies, if you put aside how hateful they are and how horrifying they are to our politics, they're good entertainment. They're good TV. He's able to bring people in because he's this very singular personality. So he brought this movement with him. Can a new Republican bring the same movement? That is to be determined. But I agree, the threat is very real that someone can take some of the Trump agenda, some of the xenophobia, some of the racism, package it differently, and come and win and really be much better at being Donald Trump. I mean, what saved this country in part was that Donald Trump could not do more with his 2 years of total control government. The tax bill was the big legislative, accomplishment. They did not repeal the Affordable Care Act. They could not get the votes together. They no alternative plan. Healthcare was mostly preserved, and Trump was left to sign various executive orders to, obviously implement the Muslim ban. I'm not downplaying any of that. It's just that Trump could not implement the dream agenda that someone like Stephen Miller probably wanted. And we were left with this shambolic, strange presidency that really the greatest legacy of it will be the appointment of the Supreme Court justices. So I agree, winter is coming, and Democrats must mobilize for 2022 and must really start thinking about 2024 and find some way, if it's through executive order, if it's through the Federal Reserve, to get money into people's pockets. It's really that simple. If you can do that, you can hold on. If you don't, a Republican can swoop in and easily say, your life got worse from 2021 to 2024. I'll come and make it better.
I want to ask you to elaborate on a point that you started to make, which you wrote a whole article about last year, and you just shared it on Twitter, which was Trump's personality. You said he was not does not come off like a typical politician. He speaks from the hip, and he's like the kind of guys you played basketball with. Can you elaborate on that point that you made in that article?
I live in a swing congressional district that actually voted overwhelmingly for Donald Trump. It appears the numbers still have to come in, so Trump probably broke 60% in my childhood congressional district. So I grew up in a strange area with a lot of Trump supporters. So while I'm very much of a leftist, I've always tried to understand why people like Donald Trump. And one reason I do believe, beyond racism, beyond xenophobia, I think that's a part of the rationale. I do think the personality, this charisma, this sort of performance art that Trump does on the stage draws people in. He's very much like a WWE personality. You know, he's on The Apprentice for many years. He doesn't speak like a politician. He speaks like someone, even though he's extremely privileged. I should not say wealthy because his tax returns show something else, but he was a child of privilege. We know that. He does not speak like a patrician. Mitt Romney spoke like a patrician. John McCain spoke like a professional, polished politician. Donald Trump does not. And I do think some of the affect, some of this entertainer kind of approach that he takes is something that cannot be undersold. I use the example of I watched, like all of us, the first presidential debate. General consensus was Trump lost the debate horribly and was terrible, right? He interrupted Joe Biden. He seemed crazy, all that stuff. I tried to watch it very apolitically, if that makes sense, putting aside my policy differences with Donald Trump. And I didn't quite see it that way. And I spoke to some people who were a bit more disengaged from politics than me. And they actually thought, wow, Donald Trump looks really kind of strong and entertaining and kind of swaggering, right? And I do think there is something to that when we think about why did he improve his margins in a lot of different communities. He did organizing, he did disinformation. There is something to be said culturally that he is someone who did not come from the world of politics, and he's someone who has this very distinct appeal that speaks to certain working class people who are not enculturated, people who maybe didn't spend 4 years in college, didn't get a PhD. It is something about his manner, and if you watch his rallies, you see this, and that is kind of what I was getting at. And it's a hard thing to exactly explain, but having grown up in a working class area, surrounded by people who would go on to vote for Donald Trump, some of whom I would not characterize as racists or people who would be part of kind of a white supremacist organization. I do think that was there.
Just to build on that, I mean, there was a survey I was reading just a few days ago, and I actually have it pulled up here by American University that was put out in, I think, middle of the year, a survey of young African-American voters. And it found that at that point, something like 78% or so of young Black voters were going to vote for Biden. And some others hadn't made up their mind. Obviously, as we got closer, I think that number increased because I think people realized what a disaster Trump was and they had to get rid of him. However, even among that total, there was a question asked, which was, when given the statement, I do not always like President Trump's policies, but I like the way President Trump shows strength and defies the establishment. 35% of those who were 18 to 29 and 40% of those 30 to 44 agreed with that, with men more so than women. And, that may help to explain part of, as you say, Ross, part of Trump's appeal to not just white working class voters, but working class voters beyond race. Another statistic that I found striking, there was a survey again of young voters across all different lines that was put out recently. And it looked at how well Biden did in communities that were mostly Black or mostly Latino. And it found that while in places like Atlanta, the margins for Biden were massive, and pretty much all across every other state that they looked at. In Florida, interestingly, Biden was actually down in communities where it was a majority Black residents. And that may be a result of the really intense mobilization effort that Trump and the Republicans, am I still there? Yep, the Trump and the Republicans did in that state, but it shows that there is a certain sense of, there's a certain appeal that he has to people, and you know, that it can grow, and in the absence of any sort of really robust program that's offered, you know, this kind of culture war stuff, this sort of, you know, I'm going to defy the establishment, this kind of big show that Trump and other right-wing populists put on, if there isn't something really concrete to offset it, I think it's really easy for people to be attracted to that. And yeah, we should not underestimate that.
Okay, I want to move along to the last part of our show, which is what kind of administration Joe Biden is going to run and how progressives can influence him. If we can, what are the best ways? And it's looking to me like, you know, and I know, Branko, you're going to share this opinion because we discussed this in the 90-minute interview we did of your book. Yes, he's known for reaching across the aisle, but the way he reaches across the aisle is to convince Democrats to do Republican programs. And we now see that he wants to put Meg Whitman, an actual Republican, into his cabinet. He wants to reappoint Ernest Moniz as energy secretary. He was the one that was responsible for Obama's all of the above energy strategy, which caused fracking to quadruple in this country. He wants to put in Susan Rice, who's a literal neocon, as defense secretary. And he's already said that he's not going to put in like Bernie Sanders as labor secretary or Warren as treasury secretary because he wants to keep them in the Senate. I read something today that he wants to rejoin the TPP. So I don't see what kind of administration, and I think he's looking forward to not winning the Senate because that way he can use McConnell as an excuse for not pushing progressive programs and policies. Branko, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is really worrying. Obviously, as we've all mentioned, you know, 2022 is coming, and if things don't improve by then, there could be the Republicans could retake the House, they could increase their majority in the Senate, they could make Biden an even more diminished president, and then set the stage for something even worse to come in 2024. I mean, I think that the one of the big differences between Biden now and Obama in 2008 is that there's a real sense on the ground and among the left, but also among other groups that, one, Biden is not this magnetic, inspiring figure like Obama was that makes people just sort of go, well, you know what, let's just let him do what he does and we'll get back to sleep. And I think there's a real appetite to challenge him on things. And I think that, that we have a very limited amount of time when we think about climate change, very limited amount of time. And I think there's no sense of sort of playing small ball anymore and in sort of just kind of going, well, we didn't get it this time, but next time. I think that, there has to be the same kind of scorched earth resistance effort that was done against Trump that has to be done against Biden. Who is Biden going to feel more pressure from? Is he going to feel more pressure from his right flank and these Republicans who are whispering in his ear, or is he going to feel more pressure from conditions on the ground, protests, that kind of thing, people that are making the lives of his, down ballot Democrats harder. And so I think that, that's one thing to consider. Another thing to consider is that in the House, the Democrats' diminished majority there, it actually could end up playing in some ways to the advantage of the left, because with that smaller majority, that means these left-wing members of Congress that are in there now have a little more leverage when it comes to votes. They can, if they want, they can do the Tea Party caucus thing and, basically say, hey, we are going to torpedo the things that you want. We're going to make life hell for you unless you give us what they want. It's going to make them incredibly unpopular, I think. It's going to make give them a lot of bad attention on cable news. But, what is the point of not doing it at this point? There's only so little time. You may as well just pull out all the stops and do what you can.
Well, Jennifer, you mentioned when we were talking prior to the show that you learned a lot about strategy in this election. And Center for Popular Democracy did what we think all good progressive organizations should do, which is poll their members to decide who they should endorse. And of course, you endorsed Bernie Sanders. And then when Bernie dropped out, you endorsed Joe Biden. You're a lot more radical, I guess, than a lot of some of these heads of progressive organizations. And sometimes when you get funding, I think it diminishes your ability to be radical. Like Ross, you talked about DSA being Bernie's legacy. You wrote a whole article about that, the growth of DSA from 6,000 people to 100,000 people, and you think that they should professionalize and hire staff. I worry about that because when I see that happen, I look at the Sunrise Movement, for example, you know, they became more about the seat at the table, you know, and not doing radical actions. I also look at labor. They're also about the seat at the table. They don't take advantage of their most radical action, which is the strike. And similarly, Varshini Prakash, when I asked her, and this was 2 years ago, would you counsel your young people to put your bodies in front of the pipelines because climate change is happening so quickly now? She said, no, we're not going to do that. I mean, it seems like the most radical they're going to go is, you know, occupy Nancy Pelosi's office for a few hours. And what did that really do? Some of this is just performative, in my opinion. You know, I saw a show yesterday with Naomi Klein and Keonga Taylor and Astra Taylor, and they were talking about we need to be organizing more, we need to get labor more active, we need to do coalitions among these groups. So I've been working in a lot of coalitions on the local and state level, and I see the problems with that being everybody wants to be the leader, and it's very hard to get people to work on a common strategy. So I'm very curious to hear your ideas for the strategy that left-wing activists and left-wing organizations need to be utilizing going forward in a Biden administration.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, let me just start by saying I have immense admiration for all of the organizations and the infrastructure groups you've named and what they've built. I mean, the growth of DSA in such a short period of time, the sort of rise to power of Sunrise, and in particular of distributed volunteer, like powerful distributed volunteer organizing, I think has been really additive and actually has made some real differences in the outcomes of some of these elections. So let me say that first off. But I am radical, but I think what I learned in this, especially through this primary season and in this election, is that we have to have a humble assessment of our own strength and power. Right. And so you asked what kind of, governance Joe Biden is going to exhibit, but left to his own devices, he will be a neoliberal who will maintain status quo, try to, get stuff to balance out, but it will be woefully inadequate for the challenges we are going to face as we try to emerge out of this pandemic. And so I think, the left needs to be really strategic in understanding first of all, what are the ways that he can govern that are not going to be fights with the Republicans, right? So that's, administrative rule change, which was a favorite tactic of Obama, as well as executive order, are going to be important. The challenge with executive order, of course, is that so many of them will end up on this, completely installed Supreme Court. So we'll have to be, we do not want to get bad case law and bad precedent from decisions that are made at that level. So we'll have to be smart. But it will be up to us. It will be up to all the people who have been in resistance fighting back against this Trump administration. You mentioned, Ross, I think, protecting the ACA, was arrested 6 times, body on the line, breaking up those hearing rooms, pushing Democratic senators, pushing John McCain, right? Adi Barkan, confronting Jeff Flake on the plane. So we will have to take all that energy, right? All of that willingness to try every tactic and to try to figure out, what works, and redirect it now to the folks who are in power. And then Congress, that includes Nancy Pelosi, it includes, Clyburn and Jeffries, right? And the leadership, and the Senate, right? It's both Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell, right? That we have to be having this relationship with, and certainly it will carry on to the to the Biden White House. We will have to focus. There's going to be a multi-trillion-dollar relief bill. That will be Joe Biden's number one priority, besides just refilling the infrastructure of the literal government, right? The institutions that Trump has completely hollowed out. His number one priority, is gonna have to be getting relief to people, to cities, to states before they go bankrupt, et cetera. So what is our play there? Because we don't have enough power to get the laundry list, like, everybody's like, can this be an FDR moment? And, I think we're like, Joe Biden is far from FDR. So I think we have a long way to climb, and we're gonna have to decide what are some of our top priorities. Making sure undocumented immigrants are included, right, is really critically important. Making sure money goes directly to people and gets into people's pockets, right, is critically important. Canceling rent will be immensely important because people are 8 months behind in many cases, right? And then obviously healthcare is going to be a big battle. And, this commitment to a public option is going to have to be sort of borne out, and we're going to have to see what that organizing looks like. So look, there's a lot there. There's a lot that could go well for us. And there's a lot that if the bare minimum is clinged to, it won't be enough, right? Like simply passing one more $1,200 stimulus check, quote unquote, is not going to change the material conditions that all of us have discussed needing to change if we're not going to set ourselves up for a major catastrophe in future elections.
All the big egos involved with organizations, they all have leaders. And I've been an organizer for about 10 years, pretty actively. And what I've noticed is so many people want to start a new organization rather than, join with an existing organization that already has the plan and the program and has their shit together. And I find that's our biggest undoing. But when we get a charismatic leader like Bernie Sanders, like one guy running for the top office, it seems like we can all come together behind it. But when we're talking about doing something in coalition with all these different priorities, so maybe without being specific, you can say how, you can just say, how do you?
Let me just say, I don't think that the organized left is like the problem, right? I think our relationship to the party is vastly different. If you look at the sort of leaders of the the anti-mask protests, the stand your ground, the Capitol gun, protests, like if you look at all of these right-wing protests, they are in lockstep and coordinated with the Republican agenda, right? And AOC said it best, like there is a faction within the Democratic Party that sees those of us who are pushing to be the country that people actually deserve, not the country that, the most racist white folks will allow, like as the enemy, right? People literally in the Democratic Party view Black Lives Matter as the problem, not the fact that we live in a country in which so many people don't value Black lives. And so I think that relationship, the fact that they need us so desperately to win, and but for us having real conversations with our communities, not propping Biden up and saying he's the best thing since sliced bread, being honest about his shortcomings, including the impact the crime bill had on our communities, but then saying, here's why we think this harm reduction strategy of voting for him so that we can move to our next part of the strategy makes sense, right?
But that puts us in opposition to the Democratic Party.
Well, I think that's the problem, is that they see us in opposition to them. And so I think that's the realignment that has to happen. It is fundamentally a problem that progressives are seen in opposition to the party when our values are, we want everyone to have healthcare. When our values are, there's enough money in this world for all of us to thrive, right?
Well,
that's a problem.
We need to flip it. They're in opposition to us. Ralph Nader said it today on his show. He said, they could have used more weapons to get rid of Amy Coney Barrett, but they didn't want to get rid of Amy Coney Barrett because she supported all these corporate decisions. In her brief time on the bench, even talked about a decision against gig workers where she made it so that they wouldn't have to be paid overtime. And the corporations that donate to the party, this is why Nancy Pelosi keeps getting reelected as speaker, because she raises all this money from these corporations. They don't want that. So is the solution, like so many Bernie people are leaving the Democratic Party? IDEM exited in 2017. Many people are going, Green Party, they didn't even get the 1% that Jill Stein got last time. So they're a non-issue, but a lot of people are excited for the movement for the People's Party, which is a very movement-oriented thing. You hear Cornel West on their calls, Nina Turner on their calls, Susan Sarandon. or a new Labor Party? What is the answer? Do we keep sticking with the Democratic Party, trying to get more people into the squad? Because they were the one success story. The squad got all reelected. DSA members got elected, you know, in cities and states.
Well, also all of our issues won as ballot initiatives, right? All of the issues that Democrats, that that were too wild for Democrats to support, $15 an hour, legalizing marijuana, in the case of Oregon, right, full decriminalization of all drugs and narcotics, right? Like all of these issues Democrats are running away from, they're all winning as ballot initiatives in both red and blue states.
Yeah, but we didn't win the gig workers being considered full employees in California.
We did not.
You know, they spent 200
There's a lot there.
Yeah.
Talk about David and Goliath. I mean, every time you pull up the app, it literally communicates to you about the ballot initiative, right? There's literally no level of counter programming or that could have that level of efficiency and effectiveness. So and there's a lot to unpack in that one.
They also intimidated their drivers to vote.
Absolutely.
So just final, I want to give each one of my other guests a final opportunity to talk about where they see progressives going. More in the Democratic Party?
I think you have to stick with the Democratic Party. I wrote an article for the Nation about this early this year, about the old Socialist Party and third party movements in America. And the one thing I found from my research is the old Socialist Party was quite successful for a long time. But the way American politics is designed, the presidential system with two parties, winner take all elections, there is very little incentive for voters to pick a third party. And inevitably, third parties run up against the opposition of two parties, and they run up against voters who are afraid of wasting their vote, and of a system where you have to, if a third party campaign performs well electorally, you're not going to win states. You're probably not winning Senate seats. It's very hard to win congressional seats. It's just not very feasible. So while I'm very sympathetic to third party movements, and I'm an admirer of Ralph Nader, I interviewed him in college, it's not the way to go. You must use the Democratic Party as a vehicle, as a vessel, as a shell. The Democratic Party itself is not terribly organized. I think the left sometimes overstates and overthinks the great power that party elites have over the direction of the party. Barack Obama had power over the two primaries, because he was the former president of the United States and people admired him. But had there not been an admirable former president, the first Black president, who could both steer the direction of Hillary Clinton's victory and then Joe Biden's victory, the primary could have played out very differently. Joe Biden, let's remember, was not even really the party's choice. The party elites were very confused about the 2020 primary. They were looking at Michael Bloomberg. They were looking at Joe Biden. They didn't really like Elizabeth Warren. They hated Bernie. Pete Buttigieg was trying. They were like, eh. So there wasn't even really a consensus. And Joe Biden, through the strength of Barack Obama, let's be honest, he was a two-time failed presidential candidate who was picked by Barack Obama. His career is resuscitated. Now he has this great following because he's the vice president to the first Black president. He won. So what I'm saying is, I believe DSA, the Squad, the Working Families Party, Justice Democrats, I think all these organizations are moving in the right direction, which is electing left-wing Democrats, electing socialist Democrats, moving the party leftward. And I do think, despite how much people like me fixate on failure and on disappointment, we must not lose sight of the fact that the left, at least in my relatively short lifetime, has never been in a better place. Certainly it's in a better place than it was a decade ago. Just speaking about the rise of AOC, Bernie's campaign, which seemed unfathomable as recently as 2014. I think we have to remember all of this. Cori Bush's election, Jamal Bowman's election. There are so many new, fascinating, very progressive, Mondaire Jones, another one, who are entering Congress. On the state legislative level, I can speak in New York. We'll have 2 DSA members in the state Senate. That's a big deal. 4 in the state assembly. There'll be more coming. So it's a challenge. I think Joe Biden's presidency is going to be a great challenge. One, because he's Joe Biden. Two, if Republicans hold the Senate, that forecloses a lot of possibility. That is just the hard truth. But there is still a lot of places I think the left can go down ballot, and organizers have to stay engaged. And I do believe in the long-term future, it is seizing the Democratic Party, this shell, this apparatus, seizing it and making it a Labor Party, making it a left-wing populist party. I don't think a third party can do the same. I would like to believe it. I don't see how it's possible under the current framework.
Well, you make a good point, because both Barack Obama and Bernie had organizations outside of the Democratic Party that they used to go as far as they went. So I'm going to leave the last word to Branko, author of Yesterday's Man, The Case Against Joe Biden, who is now our president-elect. Where do you think progressives should be concentrating their energy during this administration?
The two major parties are written into the legal infrastructure of electioneering in the United States. And it's very, very difficult to build something beyond that. Actually, we just saw in this presidential election the way that Democrats actually work to use the courts to keep the Green Party off the ballot. So it's I think that working within the Democratic Party, for as long as is necessary, I think is probably the only realistic way forward. And I often think about the way that the Republican Party was taken over by, its own radicals over the course of the 20th century. Of course, those radicals in a much different worse direction than what we are thinking. But nonetheless, it was a very similar dynamic where they were told that they were unelectable by the party bigwigs. They were told that they were kind of crazy and loony and all this stuff, most of which I would agree with personally, except for the unelectable part. Ultimately, these very radical ideas that are contrary to the interests of the vast majority of human beings, not just in the United States, but the earth, did prove to be a pretty potent political force. And they shifted politics away from where the prevailing direction had been going in from the New Deal onward.
Thank you guys very much. And everybody, I just want to close my show the way I always do, which is stay safe, wear your masks, and keep fighting.